This morning I'm going to share as the sermon about our trip, during my sabbatical, our pilgrimage to England and to Scotland and to France. So we're going to, is there a way to turn off the spotlight? There it goes. Thank you. Wonderful. Look at this crew. And I think our friends online are going to be able to share in that as well. So first a little bit about why I'm sharing this and why it's a sermon and not just a sort of travel journal. And that's because the concepts of sabbatical and pilgrimage, I think, are really applicable to all of us. So next slide. And to think about that, here's a couple of definitions. So a sabbatical is a break or change from a normal routine, like employment, but it's also related to the concept of Sabbath, the concept of rest that is embedded in creation, which is, I think we see in our everyday life, in addition to the kind of concept of taking a day a week, as our Jewish siblings do to rest, the actual Sabbath day. But in the rhythm of our days, of our going out and our coming in, we have that pattern. And so a sabbatical is that pattern built into a rhythm of years, a time to go away, to find rest and refreshment and learning, and then return. So when my oldest was 4 years old, our bishop went on sabbatical, and we were praying for her in part of our nighttime prayers. And after the prayer, he said, "Mommy, what's a sabbatical?" And I said, "Well, a sabbatical is a time when you take a break from your regular job and usually go somewhere to learn something new." So Jacob thought about that for a minute and said, I think sometime I'd like to take a break from doing craft projects and go learn something new. So we figured that was kindergarten, his sabbatical from craft projects. So pilgrimage, I think pilgrimage is an incredible concept, and as I started to plan this journey, I began to think of it as a pilgrimage, and that concept just deepened as we went through the experience. It's a journey. It indicates usually a journey, often to an unknown or foreign place, where someone goes in search of new or expanded meaning about themselves, the world, God, or others. This pilgrimage is about meaning making. It can lead to personal transformation. Some would say if there isn't transformation, there hasn't been pilgrimage. And then the pilgrim returns to their daily life. So there's this element of going out and coming back. The high point of pilgrimage was the Middle Ages. People kind of the goal of one's life would be to make a pilgrimage to a sacred place, and they did it for all kinds of reasons, I think, including maybe that they were bored and that was the best way to travel. But also, and usually to seek healing. There are these places where it became associated with miracles, and people would go to great lengths to travel there. And in medieval texts, it also became symbolic of more than just that physical journey. It could mean the physical journey to a sacred location, but also the internal spiritual experience. And it also became a metaphor for the entire Christian journey. And so that's why I think, didn't Mac used to have a thing? He used to say, "Hi, I'm Mac, I'm a pilgrim." Wasn't that a thing for a while, right? I identify with that so much now, and I think we all are pilgrims. If we're taking our life of faith seriously as we walk through it, we're all on pilgrimage. Next. So as I began to think about pilgrimage, I realized that this sabbatical, which was in itself a time of pilgrimage, of going out and coming back, that I had a lot of like little mini pilgrimages in there. From the 6 weeks before we even left the country, after I began my sabbatical, to the 6 weeks that we were away, and the month after I returned. I went on a lot of short trips and retreats. We had a family event, and when we were in Europe, our first actual place in an actual pilgrimage site was St. Fridesweed's tomb in Christchurch, Oxford. We were there with our friends, and they said, "Oh, this is a famous place of pilgrimage. This is the sacred shrine of St. Fridesweed." And I really should have had the humility to say, "Who the heck is St. Fridesweed?" But I didn't. And of course, we learned all about her and many other saints that we'd never heard of on this journey. But you can see some of those are non-religious pilgrimage sites, like Platform 9 3/4. That was probably the most important place that we went to for my daughter. and pilgrimages that included reconnecting with our oldest friends and even our own ancestry. Next one. So as I reflected on this plethora of pilgrimage experiences, a threefold model emerged for me, which really reflects the journey of the labyrinth, which is why there's a labyrinth up there. And the first stage is intention. You set out and you make some sort of an effort or a sacrifice to get there. And that's symbolized by the walking in of into the labyrinth. Now we went on, like I said, some accidental pilgrimages, and most of those weren't nearly as meaningful as the ones that we set out intentionally to go on. There were places that we were able to visit that I've wanted to visit for 25 years, and some of those were incredibly meaningful. So after you set out on the journey with your intention and the effort and sacrifice to get there, you get there, and there's some kind of an encounter. And that comes from outside of ourselves, but we experience it in our innermost being. And it's different for everyone. There are some of the places that they were kind of like a whatever, that was a pilgrimage place, nothing happened. For other people in my family had deep, deep encounters there. But the encounter with the holy, with the transcendent, you'll find when I try to talk about it a little bit later, I find myself almost speechless because it's just like, but, you know, and maybe you can resonate and find in yourself times in your life when you've encountered the holy and what that does for you. But the third part is again about us. It's symbolized by the walking out of the labyrinth, and it's the meaning that we make of our experience. So I'm going to share with you some stories that go with each of these segments about pilgrimage. But the third one we're still working on, right? We're still integrating this experience into our lives. And I think for all of us, when we have those encounters with the holy, the meaning that we make of it, what we do with that experience, the returning home and the reintegrating into our lives is equally as important. Next. So the first story, and this one is about the intention, is Chartres Cathedral. Chartres in France is the place where the 800-year-old labyrinth is, that our labyrinth out here in front is modeled after. But I've wanted to go there since I was in college. And you'll see the picture on the left is looking into the labyrinth from where you would start walking it. It's looking right down the center aisle of the nave. And you can also see that the labyrinth is covered with chairs. So for all but about 5 hours a week, the Chartres Labyrinth is covered with chairs. They take them off on Friday afternoons for strange people that might want to come walk this ancient labyrinth. And we knew this, and we planned our entire trip around getting to Chartres at that exact time. We left Taizé, which is another incredible pilgrimage location for young people where we've been with our family, early to go walk this labyrinth. And the people said, "You're doing what? Why would you do that?" And we planned to, get on the train and get to Paris in time to get to Chartres before the labyrinth was closed that Friday evening. But what I didn't plan on was just the congestion of train travel on Fridays getting to Paris, and we couldn't get tickets on that train, so we missed the time when the labyrinth was uncovered. But we did get there 2 days later on Sunday, and I feel like that desire and intention was rewarded because even though we weren't able to walk the labyrinth, the experience that I had, that I think we all had with it, was incredibly powerful. I just sat there like keeping the labyrinth company for about 3 hours. And we were there for a mass, we were there for a violin concert in the cathedral, walked all around the cathedral, which is sort of labyrinthine itself. You can kind of walk in a circular pattern, and it's full of these just incredible treasures. They have a relic of a veil that was said to, the Virgin Mary is said to have worn giving birth to Jesus. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible holy place. And so, I'm again getting speechless. But this experience of the transcendent in that place, I think, was partly due to the fact that of the intention that we set out with. So next. So this is a very different experience. That's me in Wooler, which is a tiny little village in the northern part of England, with our lifelong friend, who's an Anglican priest, Jeff Smith. Jeff is dying of pancreatic cancer, and so we took a day out of our our week in Scotland to dip down into northern England and visit him. And it was richly rewarded taking that time out. Those few hours that we spent with him and his family were some of the most precious of the whole trip. I'm sitting there with him in his oratory, this little prayer room that he built onto the edge of his Victorian house that he remodeled. And, we just talked. We talked about pilgrimage. We talked about walking. We talked about making the journey. And it was a pilgrimage in and of itself. Now, we also made it to Lindisfarne, Holy Island, which is one of the ancient Celtic sites in northern England and Scotland, because we were there, because that's his parish church that he goes to on Sundays in his retirement. And we sort of squashed it in because we were too close not to stop by. And some of my family members had a different experience there, but I just felt like, what are we even doing? Like, I'm supposed to be feeling something holy, and I'm just exhausted, and we're going from here to there. So that for me was an example of the kind of accidental pilgrimage not working out quite as well. Next. Iona. Iona was absolutely the most transcendent encounter that I had. And this is where I get a little speechless, but this western side of the island, I walked over there one evening and I felt like I was the only person, for miles around. Just so beautiful. You feel the presence of something ancient and holy in this place that probably predates the Christian presence there, which is 1,200 years old itself. So next. I got to spend 2 nights on the island myself in a really remote shepherd's hut on the north end of the island. And the family took the ferry over to get me there, and then they went back to Mull, the larger island where they stayed. There we are arriving at the medieval abbey, which has been rebuilt largely in the 1930s by an incredible international ecumenical community called the Iona community that was having their sort of big family reunion the week that I was there. But for me, it was really next about an encounter with the place, an encounter with God in that place and in myself. Go ahead, Grant. If you listen to my sermon that I preached at St. Luke's a couple weeks ago, I referred to this little prayer room, which is when you walk into the main doors of the abbey, just on the left, there's this flight of steps up to this small circular room. It's maybe 6 feet across, with a window and a chair and ferns and moss growing out of the walls because it's Scotland and it rains all the time. And it's a place that's just meant for a person to sit and pray and to sit and be with God. And it was just an incredible gift and privilege to get to be there where people have been praying in these ways for over 1,000 years. The little carving in the door said, "Stand fast." Next. Another place of real encounter for us that actually surprised me was Canterbury. I kind of tucked Canterbury into the itinerary because, you kind of got to go to the mothership to Canterbury, or the center of our Anglican world. And we drove all the way across the country from Oxford to get there, and then we drove all the way across England at the fattest point from Canterbury to Cornwall. On the day that we had to leave, we had about 30 hours there. But it was an incredibly holy experience. This is Jacob marveling at the cathedral, and that's where Jacob discovered their love for iconography and began sketching madly away. Next. I had a friend who was also on sabbatical, a colleague from this diocese, who was there at the same time we were, and he was centering his time in Canterbury. He was just staying there for most of the summer. So he had already gotten into the rhythm of daily prayer, the community of people that prayed together, and so I got to go out to breakfast with a bunch of locals the first morning we got there. It was so neat to just walk into somebody that already had opened all of these doors and be there, not like the gazillions of tourists that get there, but be there as people who have lived and prayed in this place for thousands of years. So even though he supposedly knew the ropes, my friend and I both messed up the schedule on Saturday and got there half an hour early for morning prayer and just prayed it ourselves in this beautiful chapel in the crypt while Jacob got to explore the crypt. Next. Oh yeah, so this is Lucas who, speaking of effort, our tour guide said this is where the pilgrims would go up the steps to get to the shrine of St. Thomas Becket. Only they wouldn't walk up the steps like we did. They would go up the steps on their knees, but of course we wouldn't do that today. And so of course Lucas showed him that was wrong. Go ahead.
On steps, you tend to use your hands to help you. Yeah. Oh, they went up on their steps. With
little bare knees with their shorts on. Yeah.
So, isn't it nice to be young?
So that was. So that and then the next one, if you can find it, Grant, are both examples of something that the kids taught me, which is it's not just what you find at a holy place, but it's the experience, that what you make of the experience. So the last pilgrimage encounter that I want to share, see if you can go one back there, Grant. Yeah, I know. Was one of, in Cornwall, when we were walking the Cornish Coastal Path, which we did for 4 days, 40 miles. A tour company took our luggage to each little inn that they had reserved for us, so we weren't carrying all of our stuff that we'd overpacked. But it was quite a lot of walking. And in the midst of it, Jacob at Canterbury had become really intrigued by the saints. And so had looked up everywhere that we would go, the local saint. And it turns out they say that there are more saints in Cornwall than there are in heaven. There's literally every little village has its local saint. Because in the 500s and 600s, a lot of people came over from Ireland to try to evangelize Cornwall. And a lot of them were killed, so thus becoming martyrs. But one of them, that I'm not sure if he was killed or not, but he's the kind of principal saint of Cornwall, St. Piran. And Jacob had read in the guidebook that you could get to St. Piran's oratory. It was kind of off in the sand dunes, off the Cornish Coastal Path. So Jacob was determined that we were going to get there. And we wound up, asking a lifeguard for directions. And he said, yeah, you just got to go like over there and you'll see a giant cross. And so we took off over the sand dunes, and it was, it was quite a bit of additional exploration and walking, but we found this place. And we got there, and to my eyes, it was a little disappointing. So they had taken this 5th century stone chapel, enclosed it in cement block to protect it, and then decided that was a bad idea and just took the roof off of the cement block. The place is filled in with stagnant water. It smells. And the other thing was just a giant cement cross on top of a hill, where supposedly the second church that he built was buried under the sand dunes. But the kids went to this place and they said, Lucas stepped into the mud in that mucky, sanctuary, and he said, this is holy mud. My shoes are holy now, Mom. Like, can I ever wash them? No, these were serious questions he was asking. He's like, I can never throw these shoes away. They're holy shoes now. And we found the depression where the holy well must have been, because all of these sites had holy wells, and there was mint growing in it. And they said, this is holy mint. And they dug up some of the mint, and they put it in a little bottle and carried that mint around, as we traveled for another 2 weeks. And it stayed alive. And they rooted it and planted it at the Airbnb that we stayed in London, because we figured we couldn't bring it on the plane. So the experience is not only what you put into it and what you encounter there, but it's also what you make of it. And the kids were such a huge teacher to us in that. Next. So this is a little saying about pilgrimage that I can't attribute, because I just learned it from a friend on the pilgrimage that I broke my ankle on a few weeks ago. But I thought it was really apropos to this conversation. If you don't journey and you change, you're just changing according to the circumstances around you, you're a chameleon. If you journey and you don't change, you're a tourist. But if you journey and you are changed by it, then you're a pilgrim. And I think we are all on a journey, whether that journey is just here to church this morning, even turning on the computer and getting on and participating in church this morning, whether it's to one of our holy places here in the valley, places that are holy to you in your life, or the pilgrimage of your heart. We're all on this journey. Zacchaeus was on a journey too, right? Even though he stayed at home, he climbed a tree. He journeyed right to that top of that tree because he had the desire, the intention to get a little bit out of his comfort zone and to see what this Jesus guy was all about. And he had an encounter with Jesus. That effort was rewarded. Jesus went to his house where he was able to show him hospitality and welcome him. And Zacchaeus was changed by that encounter. His life was transformed. So my invitation for all of us this morning is that we consider our lives, the journeys that we are on, the journeys that we take, the journeys that we may be called to take as pilgrimage, and that we're changed. I've said these things to you in the name of our friend and Savior, Jesus the Christ. Amen.